They didn't say, "Merry Christmas," when I walked in. No hugs, no smiles, just silence, and the sound of silverware scraping porcelain. I stood in the doorway, holding the pie I'd spent the night before baking, like some offering at a temple where I no longer belonged. My mother looked at me like I'd brought shame in my hands instead of dessert. My brother's fiancé whispered something behind her napkin, and everyone chuckled. Then my aunt looked up, eyes flat, and said, "Oh, we thought you weren't coming. The kitchen's already full, so maybe you can eat by the service door." My chair, gone. My name card, missing. My stocking wasn't hanging by the fireplace with the rest. The place I used to sit as a child, between Dad and the tree, had been filled by my sister's dog. They had rewritten the script of Christmas, and in this version, I didn't exist. I wanted to ask why. Why the people who raised me had so effortlessly erased me. Why my mother couldn't look me in the eye. Why no one stopped it. Not even the cousin I once shared bunk beds with during blizzards. But I knew the answer. I'd stopped being useful. I no longer played the role they wrote for me, the obedient daughter, the filler at the table, the one who never asks for more. Then the doors opened. My assistant walked in, coat draped over one arm, iPad in the other. She scanned the room and smiled. "Ms. Hammond," she said, voice cool and bright. "Your car is ready, and your 2 p.m. with the Attorney General is confirmed." Every fork dropped, every eye widened, and just like that, the girl they called the help became the one they had to ask for help. I'm about to share something that broke me, then remade me. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments? Or tell me where you're from? I love hearing how far my story reaches. It reminds me I'm not alone in this. And if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit subscribe. Let's build a place where stories like ours are not invisible anymore. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. The envelope was red. Not holiday red, metallic, ceremonial, and expensive looking. My name was written in elegant gold script. Celia Hammond. The sender? Veronica Hammond, my father's widow. Inside, a folded cream card read, "It's been too long. Family is still family. We hope you'll come home this Christmas." I stood there in my kitchen, the envelope trembling slightly in my hand. "Home," she wrote, as if I had one, as if they hadn't kicked me out like an unwanted guest exactly 48 hours after my father's funeral. The snow was falling hard that December, the kind that silenced everything. But my memories were loud. When I was little, home was a place of warm hands, peppermint tea, and bedtime stories told by a man in uniform. I was my father's little princess, tucked into his military duffel coat on cold days. My mother, Eleanor, was the quiet strength behind him. A high school librarian who taught me to question everything, except the love in our house. When she died of a sudden stroke, I was 15. Dad wasn't the same after. He grew more silent, more rigid, like the structure that had held him up cracked with her absence. A year later, Veronica arrived like perfume in a storm. Beautiful, composed, with a laugh that never quite reached her eyes, a widowed socialite with a daughter my age, Tessa. At first, Veronica played her role well. She brought me tea, complimented my drawings, even took me shopping once. But slowly, things shifted. I lost my room and was moved to the guest bedroom for renovations. My seat in the car became the middle. My name disappeared from Christmas cards. In family portraits, I stood further and further from the center. Then came the news. My father, Gregory Hammond, a decorated colonel, died overseas during a classified operation. I didn't even hear it from her. A retired comrade of his called me in tears. By the time I got home, there was no body, just a sealed urn and a cold explanation. cremated under diplomatic protocol. I wasn't allowed to open it. At the will reading, I expected dignity. Closure, maybe. Instead, I got betrayal wrapped in legalese. The family estate, the ancestral home, the investment portfolio, everything had been reassigned 6 months earlier to Veronica and her daughter. I received a nominal education grant from a scholarship fund bearing my own last name. I was given 48 hours to vacate what had once been my home. The help barely looked at me as I packed. Tessa watched from the top of the stairs, arms crossed, lips curling. "You used to be family," she said, like it was a joke. I didn't cry. I just pulled my suitcase through the snow and swore to myself, I'll never return. Unless it's with the last laugh. I started from zero. A city I didn't know. A face I no longer recognized in the mirror. But fire has a way of purifying. Over 5 years, I built something most wouldn't dare. A coaching company for women over 40 who were told their lives were behind them. I called it CH Enterprises, just the initials. No one outside my circle knew who I really was. We didn't offer spa days. We rebuilt lives in boardrooms. That's when Grace Linwood walked in. She was a client at first, stuck between a dead marriage and a dying career. She became my assistant 6 months later, then my closest ally. We never talked about our pasts. We just worked. Clean lines, clear contracts, no mess. That was the rule. Now, I held this letter. Family is still family. I laughed bitterly. I set it down on the counter, poured myself a glass of red, and stared out at the Seattle skyline. The glass fogged in my hand. Then I reached for my phone and typed a single message. Prep for Plan B. I'm going. But this time, not as their daughter. I didn't come back for nostalgia. I came back to finish what was unfinished. The Hammond estate looked like it always had on Christmas Eve. Lit windows behind frosted glass, tall hedges neatly trimmed even in winter, and that silence only old money could afford. Snow crunched under my boots as I stepped through the gates I once watched close behind me for what I thought was the last time. No one greeted me. A young woman I didn't recognize opened the door with the kind of politeness reserved for delivery people. She wore the uniform of the house staff. Her eyes flicked over me without a trace of recognition. "You must be from the catering service," she said. I smiled. Something like that. I stepped inside. The air smelled like pine and burnt sugar, exactly as I remembered. The grand staircase, the chandelier, the cold marble beneath my feet. It was all the same, yet utterly unfamiliar. As if my memories had been dusted over, tucked behind newer, glossier ones that had nothing to do with me. Then she emerged. Veronica. Same perfectly toned hair. Same sharp cheekbones and lipstick like a threat. She wore an ivory dress under a fur-trimmed robe, like a walking holiday card for cruelty. "Celia," she said, drawing my name out as if tasting it for the first time. "You're early. Good. We could use some help getting things ready." She handed me a gift box tied with velvet ribbon. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a folded white apron embroidered with holly. A joke, no doubt. I looked at it, then at her. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I simply pulled it out, shook it loose, and slipped it over my head. Her eyes narrowed, just slightly. "Good girl," she whispered, turning back toward the dining room. It wasn't surrender. It was theater. The costume for the role I needed to play. A few hours more, and I'd rip it off myself. The guests arrived slowly, like a parade of ghosts from a life I never wanted. I recognized a few of them. Tessa's high school friends, local foundation donors, a retired senator who once patted my head and asked if I still played piano like a good little girl. No one recognized me, or if they did, they pretended not to. I was introduced by Veronica as an old friend of the family helping us out tonight. I smiled and nodded and topped off champagne flutes like a pro. As the courses moved from soup to prime rib to pear tartlets, I moved with them, clearing plates, refilling wine, pretending not to hear. But I heard everything. "You look familiar," one woman said, "but I can't place you. Are you on LinkedIn?" "Oh, that dress is darling," another chimed in, glancing down at my navy sheath. "Marshalls? Or was it TJ Maxx?" "It's so good of you to pitch in," a man chuckled, nudging his wife. "Always nice when help takes pride in their work." Each sentence was a paper cut. But they never reached the bone. I wasn't there to be wounded. I was there to gather ammunition. And I got it. In the hallway near the wine bar, I slipped behind the open pantry door and pulled out my phone. I recorded, quietly, steadily, as Veronica leaned into one of the donors and purred. "It's just a matter of reallocating the funds creatively. The board doesn't need to know every detail. We've had to offset some personal expenses this year." Her laugh, soft and calculated, was all the confirmation I needed. I saved the file, locked the screen, and slipped the phone into the pocket of my apron. Let them laugh. Let them sip their $300 Bordeaux. Then came Tessa. She made her entrance like royalty, a red velvet dress clinging to her curves, chandelier earrings swaying with every dramatic turn of her head. My breath caught, not because of her beauty, but because of what hung from her ears. My mother's diamonds, Eleanor's, the ones she wore every Thanksgiving and refused to lend out even once, now dangling from Tessa's lobes like trophies. She approached me with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Still blending in, I see," she murmured as she brushed past me. "Guess no one really needs to know the name of the girl clearing plates, huh?" I stood still, fingers tightening around the stem of an empty wine glass. And I smiled back. Because the thing about playing the help, no one ever sees you coming. The room smelled of cinnamon and condescension. Laughter bounced from wall to wall, circling the towering Christmas tree like a spell no one questioned. Glasses clinked. Someone played Silver Bells too cheerfully on the baby grand, and every guest was perfectly nestled in their curated illusion of holiday joy. Then the front door opened. It wasn't loud, just decisive. All heads turned. Grace stepped inside like she had every right to break the rhythm. Her charcoal gray trench coat flared slightly behind her, heels clicking on the marble as if announcing more than her arrival. She wore a deep navy sheath, tailored sharp, with a single folder in one hand and a purpose in the other. "Ma'am," she said, voice steady and loud enough to cut through the second chorus of laughter. "The board is waiting, and the governor's office would like to confirm the final signing date for next week." The room froze. Utensils paused mid-air, a wine glass tilted dangerously in someone's grip. Tessa turned pale under her perfectly applied blush, and Veronica's smile twitched. Just once, before settling back into its default performance. I didn't rush. I walked, measured and silent, toward the center of the room. I looked at each face, each shocked, confused, or suddenly calculating face, as I reached for the ribbon at the back of my apron and untied it slowly. The soft cotton slipped from my shoulders like the end of an act. Underneath, my midnight blue suit caught the chandelier's light. White collar, slim lapels. Everything crisp and deliberate. I folded the apron in half, then in quarters, and placed it gently onto a silver tray on the buffet. "Apologies for the interruption," I said calmly, "but I have a meeting to attend. With people who respect my time." I didn't need to look back, but I did. Just enough to let Veronica see that I wasn't bluffing, wasn't embarrassed, wasn't someone she could mold anymore. She opened her mouth, perhaps to retort, perhaps to ask. but Grace was already beside me. She handed me the folder. This is the breakdown of anonymous funding from CH and Company to the Hammond Outreach Foundation, going back 5 years, Grace said clearly, her voice echoing off the grand walls. Effective January, all contributions will cease. I added, transparency is essential, especially for public-facing foundations. Wouldn't you agree? My tone was sweet, just sharp enough to draw blood without leaving a mark. Then Grace flipped to the back page. This document shows a forged authorization for a $75,000 event grant. Veronica Hammond signing on behalf of a donor who, as you can see, has issued a cease and desist. Veronica's jaw clenched. I always thought your signature had more flourish, I said, tilting my head. This one feels rushed. A wave of silence rolled through the room, slow and thick. I could feel the shift in air pressure, like something sacred had been punctured. A man near the mantel. Someone older. Someone I vaguely remembered as a distant cousin or a minor investor, stood quietly, nodded once toward me, and walked out, coat folded over his arm like he'd had enough of the charade. Tessa was frozen, still gripping the stem of her wineglass, her lips parted slightly as if unsure whether to feign confusion or collapse into outrage. Veronica hadn't moved, not a hair, but her fingers were tight around the edge of the tablecloth, white against red. I believe dinner is over, I said, and turned. I didn't hurry. I didn't slam any doors. I didn't need a final line. I walked through the house like it was mine, because once it had been. And now I was reclaiming something they never understood how to value. I stepped out into the snow, cold biting at my cheeks, but my steps were light. Grace followed, silent as always. Just before we reached the car, she stopped and slipped off her coat, draping it over my shoulders. You left yours, she said simply. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. For the first time in years, it was the one looking back at me. I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating endlessly on the nightstand, the Seattle skyline still cloaked in a slate-gray morning. My apartment, high above the street noise and distractions, had always been a quiet sanctuary. But today, silence didn't mean peace. I reached for my phone, still half under the covers, and the screen lit up with a barrage of notifications, texts, missed calls, email alerts. My stomach tightened before I even tapped the first one. Then I saw the headline, CH the power woman behind a shadow empire accused in controversial takeover, linked to the mayor. It was printed in a local tabloid, but those were the ones people read first. The photo was unflattering, zoomed in from across the street as I exited a client luncheon last fall, looking precisely as cold and calculating as the article painted me. The piece twisted a perfectly legal, life-saving acquisition of a failing startup into a narrative of predatory ambition, suggesting insider deals and political favors. They even used the phrase financial puppet master. By mid-morning, the damage had begun to bloom. One by one, the cracks spread. A call from Chicago came first. Ellen Monroe, the banking CEO who had stood beside me in launching our Reignite at 50 initiative, quietly informing me she was withdrawing support. We're being cautious, Celia, she said. It's too hot right now. Then a second call. Brian from Palm Springs, whose skincare empire we helped scale nationwide. Same reason, different tone, more fear than formality. They're not judging you, Grace tried to reassure me. They're judging the noise. I nodded, but noise has a way of becoming identity if you don't silence it fast. Within the hour, I'd gathered our core team in the conference suite of my firm. Grace, always my right hand. Mira, our PR attorney. Ellis, a veteran journalist who owed me 2 favors. And Nadine, a cybersecurity and online crisis expert who'd once worked for a senator accused of embezzlement and kept him out of prison. "We don't panic," I said, standing at the head of the room. "We plan. We clarify. We tell the truth, but surgically." Grace slid the first printout across the table. "We found the leak," she said quietly. I scanned it. "It's the client list?" "Yes, partial. Enough to trigger suspicion. Someone posed as an investor. Coffee meeting last Thursday at the Whitmore." I stiffened. That was my day off. Grace had taken the meeting alone. She didn't meet my eyes. "There's more." After the others left, Grace asked to speak in private. Her voice shook before the first word escaped. "Celia, I didn't know what to do." My spine straightened instinctively. I didn't mean to leak anything. I thought I was helping. But that person, whoever it was, started asking about clients, and I didn't want to seem suspicious. It was just a few names, a few programs. Her voice cracked. I thought I had it under control. I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman I trusted most with the mistake she'd just confessed. And then she broke. "They knew about my past. The overdose. 12 years ago. The custody case with my daughter." She gripped the back of a chair. "Veronica found it. Or paid someone to. They said they'd send it to Lily's school board. That they'd destroy me." My breath caught midair. Veronica. Of course. She'd always played chess while others played checkers. And this time, she had gone for my queen. "I'm not firing you," I said finally. Grace's eyes widened with disbelief. "But starting today, you're off all client data systems. Permanently. You can stay. Because I know you didn't intend this. But I can't let it happen again." She nodded, slow and trembling. "I understand." She turned to go, but I stopped her with one question. "Why didn't you come to me?" Her voice was barely audible. "Because you were the first person who ever trusted me with something real. I didn't want you to see me small." And just like that, the truth cut deeper than the headline ever could. The envelope was thick, yellowed at the edges, and bore a postmark from a small town in Slovenia I'd never heard of. There was no return address, no name scrawled in cursive to soften the mystery, just my office address and my name printed in blocky international font. I held it for a moment longer than I should have, the hairs on my arms prickling before I slid a letter opener through the seam. Inside was only one thing, a photo. It was a candid shot, grainy, warm from firelight. And in the center of it sat my father. Gregory Hammond, glass of red wine in hand, seated in an armchair beside a stone hearth. His posture was relaxed, almost regal. His expression was unmistakable, stern, unreadable, but vividly alive. The date on the corner of the photo read, 6 months after the date he was declared dead. I sat down slowly. My hands trembled as I laid the photograph on my desk. The room spun, not from emotion, but from the sheer absurdity. He had died. We had scattered ashes. I had watched Veronica press her hand to the urn, cry with precision, and whisper, "Gregory always wanted peace." She had signed the official documents. She had received the ashes. Either someone forged an image to break me, or Veronica faked a death to silence him. And either truth was enough to burn down what little remained of the Hammond legacy. I wasn't about to rely on whispers or gut instinct. I called in Dale Whitmore, a former military intelligence officer turned private investigator with a quiet reputation for unearthing the kinds of truths that most people wanted buried. He showed up the next morning in a dark canvas jacket and boots that still smelled faintly of diesel. I handed him the photo without a word. 2 days later, Dale returned. He slid the photo back across my desk, this time encased in a clear folder with a digital tag clipped to the top. "It's real," he said plainly. "Taken with a mid-range DSLR. No signs of digital manipulation. Lighting, angles, depth. All consistent with the environment. It's not fake." I felt something heavy settle in my chest, denial folding into fear. "But," he continued, "tracking the source is another matter. Whoever sent this knew what they were doing. And Celia, if you keep digging, you might not like what you find. This could reach higher than a family squabble." I nodded. Not because I accepted his warning, but because I knew he was right. The line between personal betrayal and political conspiracy had begun to blur. The next hit came silently. It was after hours when I returned to my office one night. My assistant had gone home, the floor lights had dimmed, and the city beyond the window shimmered like a field of scattered gems. I immediately noticed the difference. My external hard drive, the one with archived contracts and encrypted backups, was gone. In its place, a single sheet of paper lay in the center of my desk. Written in soft pencil, the message was unmistakable. "Stop, or you'll end up like him." My blood ran cold. This was no longer about family drama, no longer a matter of pride or revenge. This was about survival. Someone had eyes inside my firm, maybe inside my life. Veronica, for all her venom, had never been subtle. But this had another signature entirely. I spent the next morning at the cemetery where my father's plaque stood. There was no urn, no remains, just polished granite and a polished lie etched into it. He defended truth with honor. I stood before it in silence. Wind danced through the trees behind me, carrying the crisp bite of December in its breath. "If you're still alive, Dad," I whispered, "I will find you. But if you're truly gone, I swear I'll honor the part of you they tried to bury." The wind answered with silence, but I no longer feared the truth. I feared what it would cost to reveal it. Grace returned on a Wednesday afternoon, unannounced, but unmistakably changed. Gone was the quiet regret in her eyes, the hesitant tone in her voice. What walked into my office now was a woman who had faced her ghosts and come back with fire in her veins. She didn't ask for permission to speak. She just began. "I know I messed up. But if there's one thing I'm good at, addiction or not, it's spotting irregular patterns. And Celia, something's wrong." She slid her laptop across my desk and pulled up a spreadsheet. Dozens of wire transfers, small enough to dodge headlines, frequent enough to matter, had been quietly routed from Veronica's consulting firm into shell accounts registered across various Caribbean tax havens. But what caught my attention was the name behind those shells, a defunct military contracting conglomerate I hadn't heard about since the early 2000s. Grace leaned in and whispered, "They were dissolved after a scandal in Bosnia. But someone's still moving money through their name." We needed answers that couldn't be Googled. So I met Dale in a private suite overlooking the marina. Neutral ground, soundproof walls, no microphones. He pulled out a manila envelope and set it gently between us. 3 months before your father was declared dead, Veronica was photographed shaking hands with General Warren Cole. Black budget logistics. Retired, supposedly. I stared at the photo. It wasn't just a handshake. It was the kind of intimate, closed-circle gesture that meant deals had already been made. "This wasn't a suicide," Dale said flatly. "And it wasn't an accident. Someone staged your father's disappearance, to disinherit him, to erase his leverage. It's not about money anymore. This is about control. Political, familial, military." The puzzle pieces came crashing together. I remembered how Gregory once insisted that no Hammond property be signed over to Veronica. He kept his accounts separate, kept me as his emergency contact for everything financial. Then, about 6 months before his death, I noticed him slowly being cut off from the decision-making process. Veronica started attending board meetings in his place, citing fatigue or overseas calls. And then, just like that, a new will appeared. One I was never allowed to see in its original form. Only a notarized copy, submitted by Veronica's lawyer, suspiciously pristine. Dale, I asked slowly, is it possible she bribed someone to fake the death certificate? He nodded without hesitation. There's a category called presumed death due to disappearance in a politically sensitive zone. If she had help from someone on the inside, military, state, embassy, she could have filed it without a body, especially overseas. All it takes is the right signature, a favor owed, and the right amount of money. And then the hammer dropped. The moment Veronica realized she was being watched, she went on the offensive. A group of former clients, mostly connected through Tessa's old network, filed a class action lawsuit claiming my company had engaged in manipulative coaching tactics and exploited emotional vulnerability. It was baseless, of course. Each of them had signed off on results, testimonials, success metrics, but truth doesn't matter when media smells blood. Headlines exploded. Is this the female Theranos? Power coach or power fraud? I became the story. Not the missing father, not the forged financials. Me. Grace wanted to fight fire with fire. Dale suggested flipping the lawsuit back by uncovering past settlements those clients had signed under NDAs, but I knew what the board would do before they even summoned me. The room was cold when I stepped into the conference. Glass walls, polished oak, the whole theater of civility. They didn't speak until I sat down. Then, in perfectly rehearsed tones, I was told the company needed to temporarily distance its image from mine. A 3-month leave of absence. No reassurances, no thanks, just optics. I stood, looked each of them in the eye. I didn't build this place on optics. I built it on rebuilding people, I said. If your faith in me can be undone by headlines, then maybe it was never real to begin with. I don't need to run the company right now. I just need to keep running toward the truth. And with that, I walked out. Not with defeat, with clarity. Because sometimes power isn't in the title, it's in the refusal to kneel when they try to strip it from you. I wasn't expecting visitors that morning. I had just finished my tea when the knock came. Sharp, deliberate. Standing in the hallway of my condo was a woman with silver hair swept neatly into a bun, her coat too thin for Seattle's damp air but her posture dignified and unwavering. "You don't know me," she said. "But I'm Marlene, Gregory's sister." I stared at her, my breath catching. I'd only heard of her in passing. A retired biology professor from Oregon, almost reclusive. "I've kept quiet for years," she said as she stepped inside. "But it's time." She sat at my dining table and slid a thick envelope across to me. "This," she said, "was in my mother's safe. Your grandmother's. Gregory gave it to her 6 months before. Before everything." My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a yellowed legal document, Gregory's original will, signed in ink I recognized. Notarized. Clear. Unequivocal. The entire estate left to me. Not a mention of Veronica. Not a hint of the forged document she had filed. "I stayed silent," Marlene whispered. "Because my daughter was about to be accepted to the military academy. I was scared Veronica would find a way to ruin that." I nodded slowly. "Fear can silence good people. But you spoke now." With this, we had a weapon stronger than whispers, a document no court could ignore. I called Dale and Grace, and within hours we organized what I called a truth gathering. Not a press conference, something quieter, but more powerful. We invited only those who mattered, a deputy from the state prosecutor's office, a few influential former donors, 2 investigative journalists, and, unexpectedly, the governor's wife, Miriam Hayes, who had once been one of our program's earliest supporters. I laid everything on the table, literally. Bank statements showing suspicious payments from Veronica's consultancy to offshore accounts linked to defunct military contractors. The forged sponsorship documents used to secure grants. The falsified death certificate with a signature traced to a clerk later arrested for fraud. A printed still of Veronica shaking hands with General Warren Cole. Dale's timeline of Gregory's financial isolation. And finally, Marlene's statement and the original will. When I finished, there was silence. Then Miriam spoke. "If even half of this is real," she said coolly, "there will be a full audit of every fund Veronica Everhart has ever touched. And if necessary, there will be a federal inquiry." The next morning, Tessa vanished, deleted every social account, closed her consultancy's license, and booked a one-way flight to Nevada. Veronica, true to form, made no statement. I stood later that week outside the glass building that once held my office. A new sign hung by the door. Temporarily managed by Strategic Committee. I looked up at the reflection of the clouds in its mirrored panels and smiled. "Power," I whispered, "isn't holding the reins. It's knowing when to let go and still make the whole carriage move." And then I walked in. The envelope was thick, gold-trimmed, heavy in my hand. Inside, an invitation written in cursive so pristine it could only have been scripted by Veronica's team. Hope for Veterans Annual Gala. At the bottom, a line in Veronica's own handwriting. "We need to talk. One last time." Grace's face darkened the moment I showed it to her. "She's inviting every major news outlet. This isn't reconciliation, it's a trap. She wants to rewrite the narrative." I nodded. "Then let's not give her the script." The Pendleton Hotel glistened with old money and manufactured virtue. Crystal chandeliers, velvet curtains, a stage framed in red, white, and gilt. I wore a suit the color of ivory, resembling the ceremonial dress uniform Gregory had been buried without. Not for nostalgia, for memory, for presence. Veronica took the stage to thunderous applause, her voice soft and reverent. "Tonight," she said, "we honor those who gave everything, the mothers, sisters, and daughters who carried the weight when the uniforms came home folded." She looked angelic, poised, until her tone shifted, sharp, clipped. "But some," she said, "build success on borrowed valor. Not everyone who shares a name shares a legacy." I stood up. No glass tapped, no microphone needed. "She's right," I said. "Not everyone who bears the Hammond name embodies its spirit, but I do." Gasps, murmurs. "I'm Colonel Gregory Hammond's daughter, and no one gets to speak for him but me." I walked to the stage, silent but firm, and laid down the documents one by one. The real will, the false certificate, the photograph, the records of the payments. My voice never rose. It didn't need to. It struck like iron. Then, from the crowd, a voice. "Wait." A man stood up, older, weathered, a name tag from Pacific Tribune. 2 years ago in Hungary, a man approached me. Said he was once U.S. Army. Said his name was Greg Hammond. But that wasn't what his passport said. The room froze. Veronica's mask cracked. She gave a slow, chilling smile. "So this is how you want to play it? Digging up ghosts? You'll lose everything again." I looked her straight in the eye. "I already lost everything that could be taken. What's left is what I was born to do. And you, Veronica, you're about to run out of shadows to hide in." I turned back to the crowd. "I'm not the maid of this story. I'm the one who came to clean house, to reclaim a father's honor, and the truth he died, or disappeared for." As I exited, heart pounding, a man in a gray jacket brushed past security and placed a small parcel in my hand. No name, no words. Inside, a photo. My father. Not grainy, not blurred, smiling, holding hands with a woman I didn't recognize. They were stepping through customs, into Brazil, stamped 2 months ago. Alive, and finally, within reach. The next morning, headlines erupted across every major outlet. From Maid to Matriarch, the Christmas fundraiser that flipped the table. Videos of my speech were shared across Reddit revenge drama threads, Twitter reposts, and YouTube commentary channels. The same people who once mocked me now avoided eye contact. But I didn't revel in the noise. I knew Veronica wouldn't go down quietly, and she certainly wouldn't drown alone. That same afternoon, Grace received a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a single typed sentence. "Stay silent, or your past will surface with you in it." I saw her face blanch. "They're threatening you now," I said. "That means we're too close to something they can't afford to lose." I called my lawyer. We filed a countersuit. Fraudulent documentation, witness intimidation, inheritance obstruction. As she dug into the case, my attorney uncovered a detail so absurd it almost seemed staged. Veronica's so-called notary? A man named Julian Holt, her former private driver. No license, no training, just a signature and a tuxedo. The judge signed the investigation request that same day. Within a week, federal agents began freezing offshore accounts tied to Veronica's charities. Tessa, her daughter, was subpoenaed and brought in for questioning. What started as smug defiance in her expression gave way to sobs. She admitted to signing false documents under pressure from her mother. "I didn't want to," she whispered, "but she said if I didn't, everything we had would disappear." And she was right. Suddenly, the people who turned their backs started crawling back into the light. A CEO who had withdrawn a $1 million contract texted me. "I was wrong. You were right." A senator who had spoken at the gala asked me to join an advisory board for military widows. I declined both. I wasn't done yet. Then came the shocker. A former associate of my father, a high-level political strategist turned defense contractor, was arrested in connection to a scheme to falsify Gregory Hammond's death certificate. When questioned, he said, "I was paid to keep the door closed." But I wasn't the only one holding the keys. Veronica, it turned out, hadn't masterminded the operation alone. Someone had hired this man years ago to erase my father, for reasons no one had yet fully uncovered. That same evening, police swarmed the Hammond estate. Grace sent me the footage. Veronica was led out in a white fur coat, her wrists cuffed, the press flashing bulbs so quickly her face was a strobe of defiance and decay. No amount of powder could hide the hollow beneath her eyes, but the biggest twist came after her arrest. Officers discovered a hidden safe beneath the basement wine rack. Inside wasn't money, but wartime files and one deeply personal item, a weathered leather-bound journal, my father's. On the last page, scribbled in black ink, he had written, "If my daughter reads this, I didn't make it back. Celia, no one needs to teach you how to carry honor. You are the honor." I didn't sleep that night, but I didn't cry either. I read that sentence until the words burned into me like a brand. 3 weeks later, I returned to the ancestral house. The yellow police tape was gone. So were the reporters and the curious neighbors. In their place, silence and dust, the kind that settles after a storm. The door creaked as I stepped in. The scent of cedar, long dried. The brown leather chair where my mother used to read, still angled toward the fireplace. My father's officer sword, slightly askew above the mantel. Everything and nothing had changed. I made my way downstairs to the basement. The safe was still open, the journal inside. I reread the last line again. "You are the honor." It hit differently this time. Not like a command, not like a challenge, but like an answer I had spent my entire life looking for. I always believed I had to fight to earn my place, to prove my worth. But maybe, just maybe, I had always been enough. I opened the door to the old study, my father's library, and began cataloging the letters, the sketches, the old unit rosters. I contacted the military archives and arranged for everything to be preserved. Not to glorify, but to tell the truth. To make sure the story wasn't rewritten in someone else's voice. I hired an architect. Restore this, I said, but not as a private library. I envisioned something different. A legal support center for women unjustly disinherited. I called it the Eleanor House. My mother's name, my mother's fight. Grace stopped by as we finalized the blueprints. She stood behind me, hand on my shoulder. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "for not leaving me behind." I looked up, tired but light. We were both left behind once, Grace, but not anymore. A month passed. I received a letter from an international agency that had been assisting with war record closures. Inside was confirmation. The body of Colonel Gregory Hammond was never recovered. The case is officially closed. Alongside it, a small item, a brass uniform button, recovered near a border checkpoint. I set it on the desk next to a teacup, the one he used every morning before heading to the base. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. I simply stepped out onto the front porch, sunlight streaming across the fields. The chill of winter had finally lifted. If my father was still alive somewhere, I hoped he felt it too. And if he wasn't, then here, in the life I rebuilt on his truth, was the part of him that never left. In the end, life isn't about reclaiming what was taken. It's about becoming who we were meant to be in spite of it all. Sometimes the greatest justice isn't revenge, but rising with grace, with clarity, with purpose. Pain may write the first chapter, but dignity decides the last. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like to walk with me through more, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe.